Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Friedlander. I am the C. Boyd and Gray Senior Fellow and Deputy Director of the Geoeconomic Center at the Atlantic Council. It's my pleasure today to welcome Michał Kurtyka, who is Minister of Climate and Environment for the Republic of Poland, today to discuss the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and his candidacy to become the next Secretary General of the organization. So, sir, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. If maybe as a first question to start off, I could ask you about, why after 15 years does this organization need new leadership, and how do you foresee the role of the OECD in global economic governance?
First of all, thank you very much, Julia. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your invitation. And indeed, 15 years ago, the world was looking in a different manner, I think. And we have an OECD, which is one of the most relevant and important economic organizations in the world. But nevertheless, since 15 years, the world has changed tremendously. And when we are speaking today of challenges linked with climate or digital, we were not speaking in the same terms of these challenges 15 years ago. The world has changed, and I think also the organization needs to change. And we, of course, have a great brain power, a great expertise, a fact-based organization. And now we need to make sure that the challenges of our time, post-COVID-19 recovery, climate, digital, solidarity, inequalities, is properly addressed. And I believe that this organization as well will benefit from a fresh look and from a new impetus in terms of management. What I bring to OECD is my unique experience of the first ever Minister of Climate here in Poland, but also of the COP24 president. I had the pleasure to preside over one of the biggest multilateral fora in the world. 196 countries in December 2018 agreed on the Katowice rulebook, so the rulebook serving the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And right now we are thinking in terms of implementation. And we have an alignment of among big economies in the world. We have US and the President-elect Joe Biden declaring that the day one he will rejoin the Paris Agreement. We have European Union in December last year, so only 1 month ago, raising its climate ambition for 55% by 2030. We have Japan, Korea going for climate neutrality by 2050. So we have an alignment of major economic powers within OECD and also outside of OECD, as China is going for carbon neutrality by 2060. So we have these challenges to be addressed somewhere, and OECD is the right place to think about answers and providing to member states guidelines and roadmap for implementing these new technologies and this ambitious climate policy. And I think that OECD is uniquely placed because we have both an economic know-how, expertise, but also OECD is very rich in terms of societal impact and ability to understand different impacts of the policy making on people. So we have education, we have employment, we have taxation, and all this combined could help member states in terms of tackling such challenges as the climate. Digital, 15 years ago, that was a completely different subject. And right now we see also the world which has switched, which has completely changed. 20, 30 years ago, 8 out of 10 biggest companies in the world had their headquarters on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Now they have on both sides of the Pacific Ocean. So this shift in terms of economic center of gravity of the world has accompanied the digital transformation of the world and rising of the digital to be the major growth engine of our economies. We need somehow to provide answers to this. And 15 years ago, these were not the questions which were that much important. They are today. And last but not least, what I think is that it will not be possible soon to rethink about such an unprecedented fiscal stimulus, which is right now on the table. 12% of world's GDP, $11.7 trillion, which we are spending on fighting COVID-19 and on helping our economies to recover post-COVID-19. How to make sure that this unprecedented spending is used productively? How can we take the most out of it in terms of new jobs, in terms of new sectors of activities? Because ultimately, at some point, we will have to repay this debt. And in times of shrinking middle class in many OECD countries, aging societies, this should not be the question which can go unanswered. So we have right now an urgent need to boost our economies and to make sure that this post-COVID recovery is effective. And then we have to accompany the spending of this money and making sure that we take the most out of this investment. So what I believe, the world has changed, with these challenges linked with climate, digital, and necessary solidarity in the terms of pandemic, in the terms of climate change, we also need a fresh look and fresh eye for OECD.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister, for giving us such an overview of the role of the OECD organization and increased importance in 2021 and going forward. Maybe given your rich experience in working in environment and climate, having been the president of the UN Climate Conference in 2018, I can ask you a little bit more about the nitty-gritty of some of these issues, specifically on climate finance, right? And this is one issue that I think is going to become, I've seen personally in my own experience as a point of conversation, let's put it this way, transatlantically and also within the European Union. How would you bring to bear these experiences that you've had, of course, as a renowned international economist as well, to discuss these issues?
Well, thank you very much for these questions. With my background of engineer but also economist, I had the pleasure to have both a PhD in economics, but my background is in engineering. So I like, and I'll be very happy to have a deep dive into practicalities, into practical way of leading the change, and especially in terms of new climate-friendly technologies. I think this combination of scientific background and economic background is particularly relevant. And I think also that at OECD we can find a combination of these skills. We have people working in the field of energy at International Energy Agency in terms of transport, International Transport Forum, but also a lot of industrial and sectoral expertise. And when we combine all this, we can find out new ideas for the challenges of the world. You mentioned climate finance. When I was dealing with COP24 in Katowice in December 2018, one of the most relevant and pertinent questions which was asked by developing countries to developed countries was how do you wish to realize the pledge of $100 billion which has been provided by developed countries in Copenhagen in 2009. And the question is of course relevant, but I think that we can have also among OECD member states a reflection about what is an effective aid and effective development aid for developing countries in times of climate change. And I think that once we are able to develop new technologies, once we are able to provide new solutions which will be both economically viable and climate friendly, they can serve not only OECD member countries, but they can serve also non-OECD member states. And when we are speaking about climate finance, we see there is a lot of money on the table among major economies. We have, for example, $400 billion declared by President-elect Joe Biden only for research and development purposes in terms of new technologies in the pursuit of climate neutrality. We have an unprecedented recovery budget here in the European Union, 750 billion euros. 30% will be spent on climate-related expenses. The same goes for European budget for 2021-2027. We have major programs. Recently, only Korea proposed an action plan in terms of spending $61 billion for renewables by 2025. Going for 1.3 million electric vehicles by 2025, etc., etc. I mean, we can enumerate a lot of measures, a lot of initiatives which are taken by many countries, OECD member states. But the question behind is, how do we synchronize these spendings? How do we take the most out of it in terms of increasing the relevance of OECD member states, in terms of fueling, helping the competitiveness of their economies, but also in terms of providing assistance, support to non-OECD member states, because ultimately challenges such as the pandemic or climate or environmental degradation are common challenges, and until everybody is safe, nobody is safe. So we need to think in terms of solidarity, and it cannot be anymore only a cherry on the cake. It must be really at the heart of our action. So again, I think that we have a lot to do in terms of removing barriers, in terms of removing gaps, in terms of climate finance, and OECD can be the right place to provide answers to these questions.
Thank you so much. And again, you very rightly identify this as an area of transatlantic cooperation under the new administration. But also, as you note, when discussing fiscal stimulus, and your chief economist, of course, did make a comment on fiscal stimulus. The OECD chief economist did make such a statement shortly ago about let's be prudent, but also be generous. Use it wisely. We can also ask you about digital services tax. Of course, this is really on making headlines. The U.S. held its fire in its investigation against the bilateral tax that France had put in place. It would probably be one of the first things on your desk as Secretary General. So how would you handle that?
Well, of course, this is a global question. Digital right now, is a technology which goes beyond borders. And when I think as an economist, I was working in the field of industrial organization. The competition law was created at the end of 19th, beginning of 20th century, with regard of big sectors such as steel, railway, but also oil. And when we are speaking of the 21st century, somehow some of us use this parallel saying that the data is the new oil. And if yes, then we need also to have a proper regulation and maybe a fresh look on international regulations. And if we do it country by country, of course it's possible, but it will not be synchronized. There will be a lot of overlaps, and it will be costly simply to put all these systems in place and then to navigate through it. And I think that OECD is really the place where we care about level playing field in terms of international trade, where the question of equal opportunities, fair treatment of companies, individuals and states is really at the heart of the DNA of OECD. So we can regulate digital, and especially the question of digital taxation, taking the full benefit of the fact that OECD has become in the recent years the only go-to place in terms of global taxation. And it can serve, again, not only OECD member states, 37, soon 38 countries, but it can serve all the countries. And I think that OECD also has this aspiration of being global, not being universal, not having universal membership, but still having a global outreach and a global impact, and we can achieve it with the discussion on digital. Digital has a lot of levels to be discussed, to be regulated in terms of individuals, in terms of companies, in terms of states, and again, making sure that the benefits of this digital transition are equally shared and that the risks and challenges are properly addressed could be done at OECD. I'm completely convinced of that, and that will be the first challenge to be raised by the new Secretary General starting his or her mandate from the 1st of June 2021, as member states decided that by mid-2021 a solution for digital taxation should be found.
Thank you so much for that. And really, thank you so much for this really wonderful conversation. You've highlighted for our viewers and hopefully for your own as well, the importance of the OECD, one of a prominent and perhaps a little bit misunderstood international organization. It doesn't make the headlines like the WTO, but it should. So thank you again so much, Mr. Minister. We wish you best of luck with your candidacy. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you.